This Unit 1 video is going to be on making a good data table. So our objective is quite simple, just to learn in Physics 519 what characteristics make a good data table. Now make sure that you're taking notes in your Unit 1 packet. In that area that's designated for video notes at the beginning of the packet. We're going to take a video quiz after this video, and you're going to get points for taking these notes at the very end of the unit. So if you need to, pause right now, get your packet, and turn to the note page. Otherwise, let's move on. Before we get into how to make a good data table, we should all know what a data table is. And some people confuse data tables and graphs because they have similar purposes. Both of them help us organize data, but in different ways. Here's a data table, and it's showing us what percentage of households owned different amount of vehicles through the years from 1960 to 2011, so for the past 50 years or so. So a data table keeps all of those numbers in there and just kind of organizes them into rows and columns. A graph, on the other hand, is a little bit more visual, and you have an x-axis and a y-axis. Our next video will be on how to make a good graph. Now that we know what a data table is, let's take a look at what makes a good data table in Physics 519. To make a data table, we need some data. So I collected 4 sample bills here. And we've got a gas bill, we've got an electric bill, we've got a cable bill, and we've got a water bill here. And what I want to do is I want to make a data table that shows what bill it is and how much that bill costs. So let's go ahead and do that now that we have our 4 pieces of data. So after you've collected all of your data, the first thing you want to do is kind of get organized. So when we're thinking about this, how could we get a data table organized and easy to read? Well, for that characteristic, I want to talk about how a good data table is neat. And what we need to do to make a data table neat is we need to grab a special scientific tool called a ruler or a 6-in-1. To make your data table neat, make sure that you use a ruler or a 6-in-1 to draw it so that the lines are nice and neat, and make sure to plan out how many rows and columns you need to make sure that it looks nice and neat all over. It's really hard to do this on an iPad, so I'm not going to demonstrate this step for you, but I'll have one inserted that I made on the computer in just a couple slides. Besides being neat, another characteristic of data tables that we want to make is that a good data table has a scientific title. It's hard to take you seriously as a scientist if you have some crazy name for a data table. So, for example, for the bills one, I wouldn't want the name to be something like Mo Money, Mo Problems, but instead, I'd want a good scientific title for my data table. Let's put one on there. So here's my nice and neat data table, and ideally you'd want your data table to look as close as possible to this, but using a ruler. The scientific title that I'd want to put on there for this one would be something like Monthly Bills in January, or whatever month it is, and be as descriptive as you can. Now you want to use your neatest handwriting, and it's hard for me to write on the iPad with the stylus that I have, so I apologize for that. But just remember to use the neatest handwriting that you can. Let's move on to the next step. Besides being neat and having a scientific title, another characteristic of a good data table that we want to keep in mind is that we put column headers. Now remember, the column, that's a structure on a building, is a structure that goes up and down to keep the building up. So, in a data table, a column is one of these. We have 2 columns here. And we want to put headers, or like mini titles, on those columns. And whenever we can put units. So for example, what we're looking at here are the bills that we have to pay and the cost of the bill. So, to complete our data table that we have laid out here, we can think about all of the bills that were there on that first slide. We had the gas bill, and the cost of the gas bill was $141.02. We had the electric bill, and the cost of that was $253.36. We had the water bill, and the cost of the water bill was $38.31. And finally, we had the cable bill, and the cost of the cable bill was $69.29. Now here's where it comes in handy to have units. So cost, since we all live in the United States right now, it's easy to assume that that's dollars. But you don't know who's going to be reading your data table and what they're going to be assuming, so let's put dollars. So you have two choices. You can put the units in the header, and then you don't have to put it next to each value, or you can put the units next to each value. And now we've got a really good data table. So instead of having those bills, those numbers kind of scattered all over the place and disorganized, this puts everything in one neat and easy to read place. So let's recap. There are only 3 things that I want you to have in your data table for this class, and they're going to be non-negotiable. So a good data table, remember, is neat. That means use a ruler to draw it. Use your best handwriting, and make sure that you take some time out to plan it before you actually draw it. So you're not crossing out extra rows that you drew in or something like that. A good data table has a scientific title. A scientific title is something that's not very jokey, but something that at the same time is as descriptive as possible. And finally, a good data table has column headers with units. Remember, this video is going to remain online for a while in case you need to watch it again. After the video's done, be sure to work on the problems that you're supposed to be working on. But first, ask Dr. Wallace for a video quiz. On the video quiz, it's going to be pretty easy if you've been paying attention to this, and of course you can use your notes. Now, I hope you can say, I can make a good data table.